Growing up in the wealthy suburbs of Greenwich, Connecticut, I learned early that being different meant being invisible. My name is Elizabeth Catherine Morrison, though everyone just called me Liz when they bothered to call me anything at all. The Morrison family had built their fortune in real estate development, creating shopping centers and office complexes across New England. Money flowed like water in our household, but respect, that was reserved for those who fit the mold. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My parents, Richard and Patricia Morrison, had very specific ideas about what their children should become. Marcus, my older brother, was the golden child, quarterback of his high school football team, valedictorian, Harvard Business School graduate. He slipped seamlessly into the family business, charming investors with his easy smile and inheriting Dad's natural talent for closing deals. My younger sister, Victoria, was the perfect daughter, homecoming queen, sorority president, married to a successful surgeon by age 24. She hosted charity galas and appeared in society magazines, everything my mother had dreamed of becoming. Then there was me. While Marcus dominated the football field and Victoria reigned over social circles, I spent my afternoons in the public library, devouring books about military history and strategy. My bedroom walls were covered with maps of famous battles: Gettysburg, Normandy, the Siege of Stalingrad. I studied the tactics of great commanders like Joan of Arc, Boudica, and Grace Hopper. My parents saw these interests as another sign of my inability to conform to their expectations. "Elizabeth, why can't you be more like your sister?" my mother would sigh, fingering her pearl necklace as she watched me sketching battle formations, instead of practicing piano. "No man wants to marry a woman who talks about wars and soldiers." My father was more direct. "You're wasting your potential, Liz. The business world rewards results, not daydreams about ancient battles." The criticism stung, but it also fueled something deeper within me. While they saw my interests as frivolous, I was developing skills they couldn't recognize: strategic thinking, problem-solving under pressure, the ability to analyze complex situations and make decisive choices. These weren't just hobbies. They were preparing me for something greater. High school was a particular kind of torture. The Morrison name carried weight in our community, and teachers expected me to excel in the same ways as my siblings. When I struggled with calculus but aced my history and political science courses, guidance counselors suggested I needed to, quote, apply myself more in practical subjects. They pushed me toward business classes, assuming I'd eventually join the family company. The breaking point came during my senior year. The school was hosting a career fair, and my parents insisted I sign up for the business and finance booths. Instead, I found myself drawn to a small table in the corner, where a woman in a crisp military uniform was speaking to a handful of students about leadership opportunities in the armed forces. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen had an intensity in her eyes that immediately captivated me. She spoke about the military not as a last resort for those who couldn't make it in civilian life, but as a proving ground for the most capable leaders our country could produce. She talked about the satisfaction of serving something greater than yourself, of being part of an organization where merit mattered more than family connections. "The military doesn't care about your last name or your parents' bank account," she said, looking directly at me. "It cares about your character, your dedication, and your ability to lead others through impossible circumstances." I stayed after the other students had left, asking questions about different branches of service, training programs, and career paths. Lieutenant Colonel Chen explained the various military academies, the rigorous selection processes, and the transformative education they provided. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was hearing about a world where I could truly belong. That evening at dinner, I made my announcement. "I'm applying to West Point." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria dropped her fork, and Marcus actually laughed out loud. My mother's face went pale, and my father's expression darkened with disapproval. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice cold and final. "Morrison children don't play soldier. We build empires, not dig trenches." "It's not playing, Dad. It's serving our country. It's about throwing away every advantage we've given you," my mother interrupted, her voice rising with hysteria. "Do you have any idea what people will think? A Morrison daughter in the military? It's embarrassing." Marcus leaned back in his chair, smirking. Let her go, Mom. Maybe a few years of marching around will knock some sense into her. She can always come crawling back to the family business when she realizes she's not cut out for real responsibility. The conversation escalated into a full-blown argument. My parents threatened to cut off my college funding if I pursued a military career. They painted pictures of a harsh, unforgiving world where I would be miserable and unsuccessful. My father actually said, "You're not strong enough for that kind of life, Elizabeth. You never have been." Those words burned themselves into my memory. Not strong enough, not capable enough, not worthy enough. But they also sparked something unbreakable within me. That night, I began filling out my West Point application in secret, writing essays about leadership and service while my family slept peacefully in their beds, convinced they had talked me out of my foolish dreams. The application process was grueling. I needed congressional nominations, medical examinations, physical fitness tests, and academic evaluations. Every step of the way, I felt like I was fighting not just for admission, but for the right to define my own future. My parents refused to help, so I navigated the complex requirements alone, staying late at the library to research every detail. My high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Henderson, was sympathetic but pessimistic. Elizabeth, you're a bright girl, but West Point is extremely competitive. Maybe you should consider some backup options in business or liberal arts. Even she couldn't see what I was capable of becoming. The physical fitness requirements were particularly challenging. I had never been an athlete like Marcus, and I knew I would need to dramatically improve my strength and endurance. I started running before dawn, doing push-ups and sit-ups in my bedroom, and using the weight room at school when no one else was around. My body ached constantly, but each morning I pushed myself a little further. My family noticed the changes but attributed them to teenage rebellion. At least she's getting some exercise, my mother told her friends at the country club. Maybe she'll slim down and start attracting some decent young men. They had no idea I was training for something far more demanding than their social expectations. The academic challenges were equally intense. West Point required not just good grades, but evidence of leadership potential and character. I threw myself into student government, organizing community service projects, and leading fundraising drives for local charities. While my classmates were focused on prom planning and college parties, I was building a resume that would demonstrate my readiness for military service. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had always criticized my inability to be social and popular like Victoria, but now I was developing leadership skills that would serve me for the rest of my life. I wasn't trying to be popular, I was trying to be worthy. When the acceptance letter arrived in March of my senior year, I almost couldn't believe it. The envelope bore the distinctive West Point seal, and inside was an invitation to join one of the most elite institutions in the country. I had been selected from thousands of applicants to become a cadet at the United States Military Academy. I wanted to share the moment with my family, to show them that their nobody daughter had achieved something extraordinary. But when I walked into the living room with the letter in my hands, their reactions were exactly what I should have expected. "You actually got in?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting this was more of a fluke than an achievement. "Well, I suppose it's something," my mother said, though her voice lacked any warmth or pride. "Though I still think you're making a terrible mistake." My father barely looked up from his newspaper. "The offer to join the business will always be there when you come to your senses." That night I called Lieutenant Colonel Chen to share the news. Her excitement and pride were everything I had hoped to hear from my own family. "Congratulations, Cadet Morrison," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "You're about to embark on the most challenging and rewarding journey of your life." She was right about the challenging part. West Point was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The academic rigor was intense, the physical demands were brutal, and the military discipline was unforgiving. But for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. My classmates came from all backgrounds, some from military families, others from small towns across America, a few from wealthy families like mine. But none of that mattered once we put on our uniforms. We were all equal, all held to the same impossible standards, all striving to become officers worthy of leading soldiers in combat. The transformation didn't happen overnight. There were moments of doubt, times when I questioned whether I was strong enough, smart enough, or tough enough to succeed. During my first year, I called home several times, hoping for encouragement or support. Instead, I got reminders of how I could still change my mind and come home to normal life. "You sound tired, Elizabeth," my mother would say. "Are you sure you're not pushing yourself too hard? It's not too late to transfer to a regular college." These conversations only strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just training to become an officer. I was proving to myself and my family that I was capable of far more than they had ever imagined. The military became my true family. My fellow cadets understood the sacrifices and dedication required to serve. Our instructors, hardened veterans who had led troops in combat, saw potential in me that my own parents had missed. They pushed me to excel not because of my last name, but because they recognized something in me worth developing. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. By my second year, I was beginning to stand out as a leader. I was selected for additional training programs, chosen to lead cadet formations, and consistently ranked among the top performers in my class. The shy, overlooked daughter of the Morrison family was becoming someone entirely different, someone strong, confident, and capable of making life-or-death decisions under pressure. My family's reaction to my success was predictably lukewarm. When I called to share news of my achievements, they listened politely, but without real interest. Marcus would make jokes about me playing Army, and my parents would change the subject to Victoria's latest social triumph, or the family business's newest acquisition. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say when I told her about being selected for advanced leadership training. "By the way, did you hear that Victoria is expecting her second child?" The message was clear. My accomplishments didn't matter because I had chosen the wrong path. In their eyes, I was still the family disappointment, just in a different uniform. But something was changing inside me. The constant criticism that had once wounded me deeply was beginning to bounce off like rain on armor. I was discovering who I really was, separate from their expectations and limitations. The military was teaching me not just how to lead others, but how to believe in myself. During my third year at West Point, I specialized in strategic planning and international relations. My professors, many of whom had served in senior military positions, recognized my analytical abilities and encouraged me to pursue advanced studies in military strategy. I was developing expertise in areas that would prove crucial in my future career, understanding complex geopolitical situations, analyzing threats, and developing comprehensive response strategies. The irony was perfect. While my family saw me as the child who couldn't succeed in the real world, I was being groomed for responsibilities that would dwarf anything they had ever imagined. I was learning to think on a global scale, to consider the consequences of decisions that could affect thousands of lives, to prepare for challenges that required the highest levels of intelligence and character. My classmates were beginning to see me as someone special. They elected me to leadership positions, sought my advice on difficult problems, and trusted me with responsibilities that would have terrified the uncertain teenager who had left Greenwich 4 years earlier. I was becoming the person I had always been meant to be, if only my family had been able to see it. Graduation day arrived, with all the pageantry and tradition that West Point is famous for. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma and accept my commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Army, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and purpose. I had not just survived West Point, I had thrived there. My family attended the ceremony, of course. The Morrison name required them to maintain appearances, and they couldn't very well skip their daughter's graduation from one of the most prestigious institutions in the country. But even on what should have been a day of celebration, their attitude remained unchanged. "Well, you did it," my father said afterwards, shaking my hand with the same enthusiasm he might show for a business acquaintance. 4 years of this, and now you're officially a soldier. An officer, Dad. A United States Army officer. Right. Well, now that you've gotten this out of your system, maybe you can start thinking about your real future. Even then, even after everything I had accomplished, they still saw my military service as a phase 1 would eventually outgrow. They had no idea that I was just getting started. My first assignment as Second Lieutenant Morrison took me to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I would lead a platoon of 37 soldiers in the 82nd Airborne Division. The moment I stepped onto the base, I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders like a familiar coat. These weren't fellow cadets anymore. These were seasoned soldiers who had volunteered to jump out of perfectly good airplanes, and they were looking to me for leadership. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, my platoon sergeant, had been in the Army for 12 years and had deployed to Afghanistan twice. He stood at attention as I introduced myself, his weathered face showing no emotion. After the formalities, he pulled me aside for a private conversation that would shape my entire approach to leadership. "Ma'am, with respect, these soldiers don't care about your college degree or your family's money," he said, his voice low and serious. "They care about whether you can make decisions that will keep them alive and help them complete their mission. Everything else is just noise." His words hit me like a physical blow, but not because they were harsh, because they were exactly what I needed to hear. In the civilian world, my family's wealth and connections had always been a source of shame for me, something that made me feel like I hadn't earned my place. But here, Rodriguez was telling me that none of that mattered. What mattered was my ability to lead, to make tough decisions, and to take care of my soldiers. The next 18 months were a masterclass in practical leadership. I learned to navigate the complex dynamics of military hierarchy, where respect had to be earned through competence, rather than inherited through bloodlines. My soldiers tested me constantly, not maliciously, but out of necessity. They needed to know that their young lieutenant could handle the pressure of making life-or-death decisions. My first real test came during a training exercise in the mountains of North Carolina. We were conducting a simulated night raid when everything went wrong. A sudden thunderstorm moved in, visibility dropped to 0, and communications with headquarters were lost. 2 of my soldiers became separated from the main group, and we had limited time to find them before the exercise parameters would declare them quote casualties. Standing in the driving rain with 35 soldiers looking to me for guidance, I felt the familiar surge of clarity that had first drawn me to military strategy. I quickly analyzed our situation, assessed our resources, and developed a plan that would maximize our chances of success while minimizing risk to the rest of the platoon. "Rodriguez, take the Alpha team and circle around the eastern ridge. Johnson, you're with me. We'll approach from the south. Everyone else, establish a perimeter and maintain radio discipline. We find our people and extract them in 30 minutes." The plan worked perfectly. We located the missing soldiers, completed the exercise objectives, and returned to base without a single casualty. As we debriefed that night, I noticed something different in the way my soldiers looked at me. The skepticism was gone, replaced by something I had never seen directed at me before: genuine respect. Word of my performance began to spread through the division. My company commander, Captain Barnes, started giving me increasingly complex assignments. I was selected to attend the Army's Advanced Officer course, where I studied alongside some of the brightest military minds in the country. My instructors were impressed by my analytical abilities and my talent for strategic thinking. During this period, I rarely spoke to my family. The few conversations we had were stilted and uncomfortable. When I called home to share news of my promotion to first lieutenant, my mother's response was predictably dismissive. "That's nice, dear. Marcus just closed a deal to build a new shopping center in Hartford. $50 million. Now that's a real accomplishment." The comparison stung, but it also revealed something important about my family's values. They measured success purely in financial terms, unable to comprehend that there were other ways to contribute to the world. My brother's shopping center would generate profits for investors, but my work was preparing me to protect American lives and interests around the globe. My second deployment took me to Germany, where I served as a liaison officer with NATO forces. The position required me to coordinate operations between multiple allied nations, each with their own military traditions and strategic priorities. The work was intellectually challenging and politically sensitive, requiring diplomatic skills I had never known I possessed. Colonel Michael Thompson, my commanding officer, was a decorated veteran who had served in the Gulf War and multiple tours in Iraq. He took me under his wing, recognizing potential that even I wasn't fully aware of. Under his mentorship, I began to understand that military leadership wasn't just about commanding troops. It was about understanding complex geopolitical situations and developing strategies that could prevent conflicts before they began. "Morrison," he told me one evening as we reviewed intelligence reports, You have something special. You see patterns that others miss, and you think several moves ahead. Have you considered applying for Command and General Staff College? The suggestion was both thrilling and terrifying. The Army's Command and General Staff College was where future generals were trained, where officers learned to think and operate at the highest levels of military strategy. It was also extremely competitive, with only the most promising officers being selected for attendance. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of responsibility, sir," I admitted. Colonel Thompson leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "Elizabeth, I've been in this man's army for 23 years. I've seen thousands of officers come and go. Most are competent, some are exceptional, but very few have the rare combination of strategic intelligence and natural leadership ability that you possess. Don't sell yourself short." His words echoed in my mind for weeks. I had spent so many years being told I wasn't good enough, smart enough, or strong enough that I had internalized those limitations. But here was a senior officer, someone whose judgment I trusted completely, telling me that I had the potential to reach the highest levels of military leadership. I decided to apply for Command and General Staff College, but I kept the decision to myself. I had learned not to share my ambitions with my family, knowing that their reaction would only undermine my confidence. Instead, I threw myself into preparing for the rigorous selection process, studying military history and strategic theory with the same intensity I had once applied to my West Point coursework. The application process was exhaustive. I needed recommendations from multiple senior officers, detailed essays on military strategy and leadership philosophy, and evidence of exceptional performance in my current assignments. Each requirement was an opportunity to prove that I belonged among the Army's future leaders. When the acceptance letter arrived, I was serving as a company commander in Kentucky, responsible for training new recruits. The envelope bore the distinctive seal of the Command and General Staff College, and inside was confirmation that I had been selected for the most prestigious advanced military education program in the country. I called Colonel Thompson first, knowing he would understand the significance of this achievement. His pride and excitement were evident, even through the crackling phone connection. "Congratulations, Major Morrison," he said, using the rank I would hold by the time I began classes. "You're about to join a very exclusive club. Make the most of it." That evening, I decided to call my family and share the news. It had been several months since our last conversation, and I hoped that perhaps they might finally understand that I had found my calling. The phone rang several times before my mother answered. "Elizabeth, how unexpected. We were just talking about you at dinner." "I have some news, Mom. I've been selected for the Army's Command and General Staff College. It's a very prestigious program that—" "Oh, that's nice, dear. Marcus has some news, too. He's been promoted to vice president of the company, and he's getting married to Jennifer Walsh. You remember the Walshes, don't you? Her father owns those automobile dealerships." The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, but it was clear that my achievement had been overshadowed by Marcus's engagement and promotion. My parents were far more interested in discussing wedding plans and business arrangements than in understanding what I had accomplished. When I finally hung up, I felt a familiar mixture of disappointment and determination. Their inability to recognize my success was no longer surprising, but it still hurt. However, I was no longer the insecure teenager who had left Greenwich seeking their approval. I was a decorated Army officer who had been selected for one of the most competitive programs in the military. The Command and General Staff College was located at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and it was there that I began to understand the true scope of military leadership. My classmates were the cream of the crop, experienced officers from all branches of the service, international students from allied nations, and a few exceptional civilians from the intelligence community. The coursework was unlike anything I had experienced, even at West Point. We studied grand strategy, the art of managing resources and alliances on a global scale. We analyzed historical campaigns and contemporary conflicts, learning to think like the generals and admirals who shaped the course of nations. The intellectual rigor was extraordinary, but I found myself thriving in this environment. My professors recognized my analytical abilities and encouraged me to pursue specialized studies in counterintelligence and international relations. I wrote papers on emerging threats in Eastern Europe, analyzed the strategic implications of cyber warfare, and develop theoretical frameworks for managing complex international crises. During my second year at Leavenworth, I was selected for a special assignment that would change the trajectory of my career. The Pentagon needed officers to serve as advisors to a classified task force dealing with emerging security threats. The work was highly sensitive, requiring top-secret clearance and the ability to work closely with intelligence agencies and foreign governments. The assignment took me to Washington, D.C., where I worked in a nondescript office building filled with some of the brightest minds in the national security establishment. For the first time in my career, I was operating at the highest levels of government, briefing senior officials and contributing to decisions that would affect American policy around the world. My supervisor, General Patricia Hayes, was one of only a handful of female generals in the Army. She had broken barriers throughout her career, serving in combat roles and senior leadership positions when few women had those opportunities. Under her guidance, I began to understand that I wasn't just building a military career. I was helping to reshape what was possible for women in the armed forces. "Morrison," she said during one of our regular mentoring sessions, "you're being groomed for something significant. The question is whether you're ready to accept the responsibility that comes with it." Her words were both exciting and sobering. I was 32 years old, and I was being considered for roles that would have been unimaginable when I first arrived at West Point. But with each promotion and new assignment, I felt increasingly distant from the family that had once defined my identity. The distance wasn't just geographical, it was philosophical. My family continued to measure success in terms of money and social status, while I was learning to think about national security and global stability. They attended charity galas and country club events, while I was briefing senators and analyzing intelligence reports from around the world. The contrast became particularly stark during my brief visits home. I would sit at the same dinner table where I had once announced my intention to attend West Point, listening to conversations about real estate deals and social gossip that seemed increasingly trivial compared to the challenges I faced in my professional life. "Elizabeth, you look tired," my mother would say, her tone suggesting that my career was somehow aging me prematurely. "Maybe it's time to consider settling down. You're not getting any younger, and all this traveling and military business can't be good for your health." These conversations were painful reminders of how little my family understood about my life and ambitions. They saw my career as a detour from what they considered a normal life, unable to comprehend that I was building something far more meaningful than they had ever imagined. My work in Washington was beginning to attract attention from senior military leadership. I was asked to brief the Joint Chiefs of Staff on emerging threats, and my analyses were being circulated at the highest levels of government. The shy, overlooked daughter of the Morrison family was becoming someone that four-star generals sought out for advice. But perhaps the most significant development was my growing reputation as a strategic thinker who could see connections and patterns that others missed. My colleagues began referring to me as someone who could think around corners, anticipating problems before they fully emerged, and developing solutions that addressed multiple challenges simultaneously. This reputation led to my selection for an assignment that would test everything I had learned about leadership and strategy. I was chosen to lead a multinational task force dealing with a complex security situation that required coordination between multiple agencies and allied nations. The assignment was classified at the highest levels, but it represented the kind of challenge that could make or break a career. As I prepared for this new role, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The family that had once dismissed me as a failure was completely unaware that their daughter was about to take on responsibilities that would have implications for international security. They continued to see me as the wayward child who had chosen an unconventional path, never imagining that I was becoming someone who could influence the course of history. The irony was perfect. While they had spent decades telling me I wasn't good enough for their world, I had been building a reputation in a world they couldn't even imagine. The Morrison name that had once been a source of shame for me was about to become associated with achievements that would dwarf anything my family had ever accomplished. But I was about to learn that my greatest test was still ahead of me. The encrypted message arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing intelligence briefings in my Pentagon office. The sender was General Harrison Webb, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the subject line simply read, "Immediate assignment, top secret." My hands trembled slightly as I opened the secure communication that would change everything. Colonel Morrison, the message began, using the rank I had earned just 6 months earlier. You are hereby requested to report to the Joint Operations Center at 0800 hours tomorrow for briefing on Operation Silent Thunder. This is a compartmentalized assignment requiring your immediate attention and expertise in counterintelligence operations. I stared at the screen, processing the implications. Operation Silent Thunder was a name I had heard whispered in classified corridors. A multi-agency initiative dealing with threats so sensitive that even seasoned intelligence officers spoke of it only in hushed tones. To be selected for such an assignment meant that someone at the highest levels of government believed I possessed capabilities that few others could match. The briefing room the next morning was filled with faces I recognized from newspaper headlines and congressional hearings. Deputy Director of the CIA, the National Security Advisor, senior officials from the State Department, and military commanders whose decisions shaped global policy. I took my designated seat, acutely aware that I was likely the youngest person in the room by at least a decade. General Webb stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding immediate attention. Ladies and gentlemen, we're facing a situation that requires unconventional thinking and exceptional leadership. Over the past 18 months, we've identified a sophisticated network of foreign operatives working to compromise critical infrastructure systems across multiple allied nations. Traditional approaches have proven insufficient. He pressed a button on the remote, and the wall-mounted screens displayed a complex web of connections spanning 3 continents. This isn't just espionage. It's a coordinated effort to position enemy assets for potential large-scale disruption of communication networks, power grids, and financial systems. The threat is immediate, and the consequences of failure are catastrophic. As the briefing continued, I began to understand why I had been selected. The operation required someone who could think strategically across multiple domains: military, intelligence, diplomatic, and technological. More importantly, it needed someone who could coordinate efforts between agencies that traditionally operated in isolation, managing personalities and priorities that often conflicted. Colonel Morrison, General Webb said, turning his attention to me, you'll be leading a joint task force with representatives from CIA, NSA, FBI, and Special Operations Forces from 3 allied nations. Your mission is to identify, penetrate, and neutralize this network before they can execute their plans. You'll have unlimited resources and direct access to this council. The room fell silent as the full scope of my new responsibilities became clear. I was being asked to lead what amounted to a shadow war against enemies who operated in the gray areas between nations and legal jurisdictions. Success would prevent potential catastrophe. Failure could destabilize the global order. Sir, I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was accepting. I understand the assignment. When do we begin? General Webb smiled, and I saw something in his expression that reminded me of my old mentor, Colonel Thompson. You begin now. Your team is being assembled as we speak. The next 6 months were unlike anything I had experienced in my military career. I operated from a secure facility in Northern Virginia, coordinating operations that spanned 5 time zones and involved assets whose identities were known only to a handful of people. My team consisted of the best specialists from each agency: cryptographers who could break codes that others considered unbreakable, field operatives who could disappear into any culture, analysts who could find patterns in seemingly random data. But the real challenge wasn't technical, it was human. Each agency had its own culture, its own methods, and its own definition of acceptable risk. The CIA operative who thought nothing of inserting himself into a hostile foreign government was horrified by the NSA analyst's willingness to compromise civilian privacy. The military special operations team wanted direct action, while the FBI agents insisted on building legal cases that could withstand courtroom scrutiny. My job was to forge these diverse capabilities into a unified force, balancing competing priorities while maintaining operational security. I found myself drawing on every leadership lesson I had learned, from my early days commanding paratroopers to my advanced studies in strategic management. More importantly, I had to trust my instincts, making decisions based on incomplete information while accepting responsibility for consequences I couldn't fully predict. The breakthrough came during our 4th month of operations. One of our analysts, a brilliant young woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, identified a pattern in financial transactions that revealed the network's funding structure. By following the money, we uncovered a web of shell companies and cryptocurrency exchanges that led us directly to the operations command center. "Colonel," Dr. Kim said, her excitement barely contained as she presented her findings, "we've got them. The entire network routes through a single coordination hub in Eastern Europe. If we can take that down, we can roll up the entire operation." The plan we developed was audacious in its scope and precise in its execution. We would simultaneously strike targets in 6 countries, using a combination of cyber warfare, financial disruption, and traditional law enforcement. The operation required split-second timing and flawless coordination between agencies that had never worked together at this level. I spent the night before the operation reviewing every detail, knowing that the smallest oversight could result in failure. My team had worked 18-hour days for weeks, and I could see the exhaustion in their faces. But I could also see something else: complete confidence in our mission and in each other. "This is it," I told them during our final briefing. "Tomorrow, we will execute an operation that will prevent potentially millions of casualties. Each of you represents the best of your respective agencies, and together, we're going to accomplish something that no single organization could achieve alone." The operation commenced at 03:00 hours Greenwich Mean Time. From our command center, I watched as teams across the globe moved with mechanical precision. NSA cyber warriors launched digital attacks that crippled the network's communication systems. CIA operatives arrested key figures before they could escape or destroy evidence. FBI agents executed search warrants that recovered critical intelligence about future operations. But the crown jewel was the assault on the primary command center. A joint special operations team, led by Navy SEALs and supported by British SAS, conducted a raid that captured the network's leadership, along with terabytes of data about their operations. "Colonel Morrison," came the voice through my headset. "Objective Alpha secured, all primary targets in custody, intel package recovered intact." I felt a surge of triumph unlike anything I had experienced before. We had not only succeeded in our primary mission but had exceeded every expectation. The network that had posed such a significant threat to global security had been completely dismantled in a single coordinated operation. The aftermath was equally satisfying. Intelligence recovered from the operation revealed dozens of sleeper cells and future attack plans, allowing allied nations to prevent attacks that could have killed thousands. The success of Operation Silent Thunder became a template for future joint operations, proving that traditional boundaries between agencies were obstacles that exceptional leadership could overcome. But perhaps the most significant outcome was personal. General Webb called me into his office 3 days after the operation concluded, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Colonel Morrison, I've been in this business for 35 years, and I've never seen anything like what you accomplished. You took a group of specialists who barely trusted each other and forged them into the most effective joint task force in recent memory. That's not just tactical brilliance. That's transformational leadership." He paused, studying my face carefully. "I'm recommending you for promotion to Brigadier General. More importantly, I'm recommending you for command of the new Joint Special Operations Directorate. It's a position that will make you one of the most influential officers in the American military." The promotion ceremony took place 6 weeks later in a small, private gathering at the Pentagon. My family was invited, of course, but they attended with the same reluctant obligation they had shown at my West Point graduation. They understood that I was being honored for something significant, but they lacked the context to appreciate what I had actually accomplished. "Congratulations, General Morrison," my father said afterward, using my new rank with visible discomfort. "I have to admit, I never expected you to rise this high in the military." His words were meant as a compliment, but they revealed the fundamental disconnect that had defined our relationship for decades. He saw my success as surprising because he had never understood what I was capable of achieving. To him, I was still the wayward daughter who had chosen an unconventional path, not the strategic leader who had just prevented a potential global catastrophe. My new position, as head of the Joint Special Operations Directorate, brought responsibilities that would have been unimaginable when I first left home for West Point. I was responsible for coordinating the most sensitive military operations across multiple theaters, managing assets that most senior officials didn't even know existed, and advising the president on matters of national security. The work was demanding but incredibly fulfilling. I was operating at the intersection of military strategy, intelligence analysis, and diplomatic policy, helping to shape America's response to emerging threats around the world. My decisions affected the deployment of special operations forces, the allocation of intelligence resources, and the coordination of activities with allied nations. But the isolation was also profound. The classified nature of my work meant that I couldn't share details of my accomplishments with anyone outside the national security establishment. My family continued to see me as someone who had chosen a demanding but ultimately conventional military career, completely unaware that I was operating at the highest levels of government. The disconnect became particularly apparent during family gatherings. I would sit through dinner conversations about business deals and social events, unable to mention that I had spent the week coordinating with foreign intelligence services or briefing cabinet members on emerging threats. My silence was interpreted as disinterest rather than professional obligation. Elizabeth never has much to say about her work, my mother would tell relatives, her tone suggesting that my career lacked the excitement and importance of Marcus's business ventures. I suppose military life must be rather routine. If only she knew that my routine included managing operations that could determine the outcome of conflicts before they became public knowledge, or that foreign governments sought my expertise on matters of regional security. The irony was painful, but I had learned to accept it as part of the price of serving at this level. My promotion to Major General came 2 years later, following a series of successful operations that had enhanced American security interests in multiple regions. The ceremony was larger this time, attended by senior officials from across the government. My family was there, looking slightly bewildered by the pageantry but maintaining their customary emotional distance. 2 stars now, Marcus said afterward, examining my uniform with curious detachment. I have to admit, Liz, you've gone further in the military than I expected, though I still think you would have been happier in the business world. His comment revealed the fundamental limitation of their understanding. They saw my military service as a career choice rather than a calling, unable to comprehend that I had found my true purpose in serving something larger than personal ambition or financial gain. They measured success in terms of profit margins and social recognition, while I found fulfillment in protecting the security and freedom of my fellow citizens. The final promotion came 3 years later, in a ceremony that elevated me to the rank of Lieutenant General. I was now one of the most senior officers in the American military, responsible for operations that spanned the globe and decisions that affected the lives of millions. The scared, uncertain teenager who had once been dismissed by her family as a failure had become someone whose judgment was sought by presidents and prime ministers. But even as I accepted this new level of responsibility, I knew that my family's perception of me remained fundamentally unchanged. They attended the ceremony with the same polite discomfort they had shown at every previous military milestone, unable to fully grasp what I had accomplished or why it mattered. The phone call that would change everything came on a Thursday afternoon in early spring. I was in my Pentagon office, reviewing classified briefings about emerging threats in Southeast Asia, when my assistant informed me that my mother was on the line. "Elizabeth, I hope you're not too busy to talk to your mother," she said, her voice carrying the same tone of mild disapproval that had characterized our conversations for decades. "Of course not, Mom. What's going on?" "Well, Marcus is hosting a family dinner this weekend to celebrate his latest business success. He's acquired 3 more shopping centers, and we're having a little gathering at the house. You should try to attend if your schedule permits." I looked at my calendar, noting the classified briefings and high-level meetings that filled every available slot. "I'll do my best, Mom. Things are pretty demanding right now." "I'm sure they are, dear, but family should come first, don't you think? Marcus works very hard too, but he always makes time for the people who matter." Her words stung with their familiar implication, that my priorities were somehow misplaced, that my commitment to my responsibilities was evidence of selfishness rather than dedication. But this time, something was different. Instead of the usual mixture of hurt and frustration, I felt a calm certainty about who I was and what I had accomplished. "I'll be there, Mom," I said, making a decision that would finally reveal the truth about the daughter they had underestimated for so long. As I hung up the phone, I smiled to myself. My family was about to learn exactly who their nobody daughter had become. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp promise of spring, and I found myself standing in my apartment, staring at my civilian clothes hanging in the closet. For nearly 20 years, I had attended family gatherings as just Elizabeth, the daughter who had chosen an unconventional path, whose accomplishments were politely acknowledged but never truly understood. Today would be different. I selected a simple navy blazer and white blouse, conservative enough for a family dinner but professional enough to hint at the authority I carried in my daily life. As I adjusted my collar in the mirror, I caught sight of the framed photograph on my dresser, myself shaking hands with the president after briefing him on a successful counterterrorism operation. My family had no idea such moments existed in my life. The drive to Greenwich took me through familiar neighborhoods where I had once felt so out of place. The manicured lawns and impressive mansions that had once intimidated me now seemed quaint, like props in a play about wealth that had lost its power to define worth. I was returning not as the insecure young woman who had left 20 years ago, but as someone whose decisions affected global security. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message from my deputy chief of staff. "General, urgent development in the Indo-Pacific requires your attention. Can you join a secure conference at 1400 hours?" I glanced at the time. 2 p.m. would be right in the middle of Marcus's celebration. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family gathered to toast his latest shopping center acquisition, I would be managing situations that could affect the balance of power between nations. I pulled into the circular driveway of my childhood home, noting the additional luxury cars that indicated Marcus's business associates were in attendance. Through the large front windows, I could see well-dressed figures holding wine glasses and engaging in animated conversation. The scene looked exactly like hundreds of similar gatherings I had attended over the years, except now I understood how small this world really was. My mother greeted me at the door with her usual mixture of affection and subtle criticism. "Elizabeth, you made it! You look tired, dear. All that travel must be exhausting. Come meet some of Marcus's new business partners. They're very influential people." I followed her into the living room, where Marcus was holding court near the fireplace, regaling his audience with details about his latest acquisition. He spotted me and raised his glass in acknowledgement. "There's my little sister, everyone. Elizabeth's in the army. She's a colonel or something like that." Very impressive, though I could never understand why she chose such a difficult life when she could have joined the family business. The casual dismissal of my rank stung, but not in the way it once might have. Lieutenant General was hardly colonel or something like that, but Marcus's error revealed how little attention my family paid to my actual accomplishments. To them, military ranks were interchangeable titles that mattered far less than net worth or social connections. I mingled politely, listening to conversations about real estate developments, stock portfolios, and vacation homes. The topics that had once made me feel inferior now seemed remarkably narrow. These successful business leaders were discussing millions of dollars and regional market share, while my daily briefings covered threats that could affect billions of lives and the stability of entire continents. "So Elizabeth," said one of Marcus's partners, a man whose expensive suit couldn't quite disguise his condescending tone, "what exactly do you do in the military? Marcus mentioned you work in administration or something?" Before I could respond, Marcus laughed and answered for me. "Liz pushes papers around the Pentagon. It's steady work, I suppose, though the pay is terrible compared to what she could be earning in the private sector." The comment hung in the air like a challenge. For years, I had endured similar dismissals, usually responding with vague explanations about military service that satisfied their curiosity without revealing the classified nature of my actual responsibilities. But something had shifted inside me during the drive here. I was tired of being diminished by people who had no concept of what I had achieved. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying a quiet authority that made several people turn toward me, "I coordinate joint special operations across multiple theaters of conflict. I brief cabinet members on emerging threats and advise senior government officials on matters of national security. The room grew noticeably quieter. Marcus's expression shifted from amusement to confusion, as if he couldn't quite reconcile this description with his mental image of his little sister's career. "That sounds very important," said the businessman, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure what those responsibilities entailed. "It can be," I replied simply, choosing not to elaborate on the classified operations that occupied most of my working hours. The conversation was interrupted by my phone vibrating with another encrypted message. This one was marked with the highest priority designation, indicating that the Indo-Pacific situation had escalated beyond routine management. I excused myself and stepped onto the terrace to read the full briefing. The message contained intelligence about naval movements that could destabilize regional shipping lanes, potentially affecting global commerce and triggering diplomatic crises. My immediate attention was required to coordinate with allied naval forces and adjust deployment strategies. The decisions I would make in the next few hours could prevent economic disruption affecting millions of people. I was drafting my response when my father joined me on the terrace, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "You seem distracted, Elizabeth. Everything all right with work?" "Just some urgent matters that need attention," I said, accepting the wine but keeping my focus on the secure messaging system. "You know," he said, settling into one of the wrought iron chairs, "I've been thinking about your career lately. You've certainly made something of yourself in the military, and your mother and I are proud of what you've accomplished, but have you ever considered what comes next?" I looked up from my phone, surprised by the directness of his question. "What do you mean?" "Well, you can't be a soldier forever. At some point, you'll want to retire and build something lasting. A family, a business, something that provides real security. The military is fine for a while, but it's not a permanent solution." His words revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had always existed between us. He saw my military service as a temporary diversion, something I would eventually outgrow in favor of real, adult responsibilities. The idea that I had already built something lasting, a career that contributed to national security and global stability, was beyond his comprehension. "Dad," I said carefully, "what I do in the military isn't just a job, it's a calling. The work I do protects American interests and saves lives. I'm not looking for an exit strategy." He nodded politely, but I could see that my explanation hadn't changed his perspective. To him, success was measured in financial terms and social recognition, not in service to abstract concepts like national security or global stability. Our conversation was interrupted by Marcus calling everyone back into the house for his announcement. I pocketed my phone, knowing I would need to address the urgent situation soon, but curious about what my brother considered worthy of such fanfare. Marcus stood in the center of the living room, flanked by several men in expensive suits whom I didn't recognize. His expression carried the satisfaction of someone about to reveal a particularly impressive accomplishment. "Friends, family, thank you all for being here to celebrate what I consider the crowning achievement of my career. After months of negotiations, I'm proud to announce that Morrison Development has been selected to build the largest mixed-use complex in Connecticut history. This project will include retail spaces, office buildings, and luxury condominiums across 400 acres of prime real estate." The room erupted in applause and congratulations. Marcus basked in the attention, describing the financial scope of the project and its potential impact on regional development. The numbers were indeed impressive. A $500 million investment that would create thousands of jobs and transform an entire area of the state. As I listened to the details, I felt a familiar mixture of admiration and disconnect. Marcus had genuinely achieved something significant in his field, building a business empire that created value and provided livelihoods for many people. But the enthusiastic reaction of our family and friends highlighted the vast difference in how society valued different types of success. Marcus's business deal would be featured in local newspapers and trade publications. He would receive awards from business organizations and recognition from political leaders. Meanwhile, the operations I managed remained classified, their success measured not in profit margins but in prevented catastrophes that the public would never know about. "Elizabeth," my mother said, appearing at my elbow with a proud smile, Isn't it wonderful what Marcus has accomplished? This is exactly the kind of success that makes a family proud. Her comment was innocent, but it carried the implicit suggestion that this was the kind of achievement I should aspire to: visible, quantifiable, and profitable. The operations that had prevented terrorist attacks, disrupted enemy networks, and maintained global stability were abstract concepts that couldn't be celebrated at dinner parties or featured in business magazines. I was formulating a diplomatic response when my phone buzzed again with an emergency alert. The Indo-Pacific situation had deteriorated further, requiring immediate coordination with Allied forces. I glanced at the time. The secure conference was starting in 15 minutes, and my input was critical for decisions that could affect regional stability. "I'm sorry," I said to my mother, "but I need to take care of something urgent. Please congratulate Marcus for me. It really is an impressive achievement." I moved toward the door, but Marcus intercepted me before I could leave. "Heading out already, Liz? The party's just getting started. Can't the army survive without you for one evening?" His tone was joking, but there was an edge of irritation that suggested he felt my departure was somehow disrespectful to his moment of triumph. Once again, I was faced with the choice between explaining the classified nature of my responsibilities and allowing my family to interpret my behavior as indifference to their priorities. "It's complicated, Marcus. There's a situation developing that requires immediate attention." What kind of situation could be so urgent that it can't wait until Monday morning? Are we being invaded? His sarcasm stung because it revealed how little he understood about the realities of modern military service. The threats we dealt with didn't observe business hours or respect family gatherings. When global stability was at stake, personal convenience became irrelevant. "Something like that," I said, choosing honesty over diplomacy. "There's a potential naval incident in the Pacific that could escalate into a larger conflict if it's not managed properly. I need to coordinate our response with Allied forces." The room had grown quiet again, and I realized that our conversation had attracted the attention of Marcus's guests. They were staring at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism, as if they couldn't quite believe that someone from their social circle could be involved in matters of such apparent importance. "Naval incidents?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Liz, what exactly is your rank in the Army?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. For years, I had deflected such inquiries with vague responses that satisfied casual curiosity without revealing the full scope of my responsibilities. But standing in that room, surrounded by people who had spent decades underestimating my capabilities, I felt a sudden desire for complete honesty. "Lieutenant General," I said simply. "I'm a 3-star general responsible for joint special operations across multiple theaters of conflict." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a dawning recognition that he had fundamentally misunderstood his sister's career. My parents looked stunned, as if I had just announced that I was actually an alien from another planet. "3 stars?" my father asked quietly. "Elizabeth, there are only a handful of 3-star generals in the entire military." 43 active-duty lieutenant generals in the Army, I confirmed. "I'm one of them." The businessman who had earlier asked about my administrative duties was staring at me with unconcealed amazement. "Lieutenant General Morrison? You're Lieutenant General Morrison? I've read about you in defense industry publications. You're the officer who revolutionized joint operations protocols." Before I could respond, my phone rang with the distinctive tone reserved for emergency conferences. "I really do need to take this," I said, moving toward the door. "Congratulations again on your project, Marcus. It's genuinely impressive." As I walked toward my car, I could hear the excited conversations erupting behind me. My family and their guests were finally beginning to understand that the quiet, overlooked daughter they had dismissed for decades was someone whose name was known in circles they had never imagined. But the real revelation was still to come. The conference I was about to join would lead to a series of events that would bring my two worlds together in a way that would change everything forever. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, watching through the rearview mirror as animated figures moved behind the brightly lit windows of my childhood home. The secure conference was about to begin, but I needed a few seconds to process what had just happened. After 20 years of careful omissions and diplomatic vagueness, I had finally told my family exactly who I was. The encrypted call connected as I pulled out of the driveway, and Admiral Patricia Rodriguez's voice filled the car through the secure communication system. General Morrison, thank you for joining us under these circumstances. We have a developing situation that requires immediate coordination. For the next 45 minutes, I participated in a classified discussion that would have seemed like science fiction to the people I had just left behind. We were coordinating the response to aggressive naval maneuvers that threatened critical shipping lanes, managing intelligence from multiple allied nations, and positioning assets to prevent what could escalate into the first major naval conflict in decades. General Morrison, said the National Security Advisor, his voice tense with urgency, your assessment of their probable next move? I analyzed the tactical display being transmitted to my secure tablet, considering variables that ranged from weather patterns to diplomatic relationships. Based on their current positioning and historical patterns, they'll attempt to establish a de facto exclusion zone within 72 hours. I recommend we deploy Task Force 77 to international waters immediately, while simultaneously engaging through diplomatic channels to provide them with a face-saving withdrawal option. Concur with General Morrison's assessment, added Admiral Rodriguez. Her strategic analysis has been consistently accurate in similar situations. As the conference concluded with assignments for each participant, I realized that I was 40 minutes away from the most consequential military decision of my career. The president would be briefed within the hour, and the recommendations from this group would likely determine whether the situation escalated or resolved peacefully. I was reviewing classified documents on my tablet when my phone rang with my mother's number. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. Elizabeth, dear, I hope you can forgive us for not understanding what you've accomplished all these years. Her voice carried a note of embarrassment that I had never heard before. That gentleman at Marcus's party, Mr. Henderson from the Defense Contracting Company, spent quite a bit of time explaining to us exactly what a lieutenant general does. We had no idea. It's complicated work, Mom. Most of it is classified, so I couldn't really explain it even if I wanted to. But why didn't you tell us you were so important? All these years, we thought you were just a regular soldier. The question revealed the fundamental disconnect that had always existed between us. They couldn't understand that I hadn't told them because their approval was no longer necessary for my sense of self-worth. I had found my purpose and excelled beyond their wildest imagination, and their recognition of that fact was interesting but not essential. Because what I do isn't about being important, Mom. It's about serving something larger than myself. The rank is just a tool that allows me to be more effective at protecting people. There was a long pause before she responded. We'd like to understand better, Elizabeth. Perhaps you could come back tomorrow and explain more about your work? Marcus is very eager to hear about what you actually do. I glanced at my schedule, noting the morning briefing with the Joint Chiefs and the afternoon session with international partners. I'll try, Mom. But tomorrow is going to be very demanding. The situation I'm dealing with is significant. After ending the call, I drove through the darkened streets of Washington, reflecting on the strange convergence of my two worlds. My family was finally beginning to understand what I had become, but the revelation was occurring at a moment when I was managing one of the most critical situations of my career. The next morning brought developments that exceeded everyone's worst-case scenarios. Intelligence reports indicated that the naval standoff had attracted the attention of additional hostile forces, transforming a regional incident into a potential global crisis. By 0800 hours, I was standing in the White House Situation Room, briefing the president and his senior advisors on options that could affect the lives of millions. General Morrison, the president said after I had completed my initial assessment, your recommendation is to maintain our current posture while increasing diplomatic pressure through allied channels. Yes, sir, direct military confrontation at this point would likely escalate beyond our ability to control. However, we need to demonstrate resolve while providing multiple pathways for de-escalation. The Secretary of State leaned forward, his expression grave. General, what's your assessment of the timeline? How long before this situation becomes uncontainable? I consulted the latest intelligence updates on my secure tablet. Based on current movements and historical precedents, We have approximately 18 hours before positions become fixed and diplomatic solutions become significantly more difficult. The meeting concluded with specific assignments for each agency, and I found myself at the center of a complex web of military and diplomatic initiatives. My staff would coordinate with allied forces, while I maintained direct communication with field commanders and intelligence assets across 3 time zones. It was during this frenetic morning that my assistant approached with an unusual request. "General, your family called. Apparently, they're hosting some kind of gathering this afternoon, and they've specifically requested your presence. They mentioned that there are some people they'd like you to meet." I almost laughed at the timing. While I was managing a potential international crisis, my family was planning another social gathering. The contrast between their priorities and my responsibilities had never been more stark. "Tell them I'll try to make it if the situation permits," I said, knowing that the likelihood of leaving the Pentagon that afternoon was virtually zero. But sometimes the universe has a sense of irony that defies all expectations. By 1,400 hours, the diplomatic initiatives had succeeded beyond our most optimistic projections. A face-saving agreement had been reached that satisfied all parties while maintaining the principle of free navigation. The crisis that could have led to global conflict had been resolved through precisely the kind of coordinated military and diplomatic pressure we had recommended. "Outstanding work, General Morrison," the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said as we concluded our final briefing. "Your strategic analysis was instrumental in achieving this outcome. Take the rest of the afternoon off, you've earned it." I found myself with an unexpected free afternoon and a growing curiosity about what my family had planned. The phone call from my mother had hinted at something more significant than their usual social gathering, and I was intrigued by their sudden interest in my career. The drive back to Greenwich gave me time to process the morning's events. In the span of 12 hours, I had helped prevent a potential military conflict that could have disrupted global commerce and triggered a cascade of international tensions. It was exactly the kind of work I had been trained for, the reason I had dedicated my life to military service. As I pulled into the familiar driveway, I noticed several official-looking vehicles parked along the street. Black sedans with government plates, a van that looked suspiciously like a mobile communication unit, and what appeared to be a security detail positioned discreetly around the property. My mother greeted me at the door with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of pride, nervousness, and barely contained excitement. "Elizabeth, thank you for coming. There are some people here who insisted on meeting you." She led me through the foyer toward the living room, but instead of the usual crowd of business associates and social acquaintances, I found myself facing a group of people in military uniforms. As I entered the room, 12 soldiers rose from their chairs in perfect synchronization, their movements precise and coordinated. "General Morrison," said the senior officer, a colonel whose chest displayed ribbons indicating service in multiple combat zones. "Colonel James Mitchell, 5th Special Forces Group. We were in the area for a classified briefing when we learned you might be available." Before I could respond, all 12 soldiers snapped to attention, their hands rising in crisp salutes. "General, ma'am," they said in unison, their voices carrying the respect reserved for senior command authority. The silence that followed was profound. My family stood frozen, their expressions ranging from shock to awe as they witnessed a display of military protocol they had only seen in movies. My mother's coffee cup slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor. My father's newspaper crumpled in his white-knuckled grip. Marcus stood with his mouth open, finally understanding the vast gulf between his perception of his sister and the reality of who she had become. "At ease, Colonel," I said, returning their salute with the automatic precision of 2 decades in uniform. "What brings you to Connecticut?" Colonel Mitchell's explanation revealed that they had been conducting a training exercise at a nearby facility when word had spread through military channels that Lieutenant General Morrison was in the area. Several of the soldiers had served under my command in various capacities, and they had requested permission to pay their respects. "Ma'am," said Sergeant Major Williams, a veteran whose service record I knew included multiple tours in Afghanistan, "you probably don't remember me, but I was part of the task force you led during Operation Desert Shield. Your leadership saved my unit when that intelligence turned out to be compromised." I did remember him, along with the night when split-second decision-making had meant the difference between mission success and potential casualties. Sergeant Major Williams, of course I remember. You were the one who identified the alternate extraction route when our primary LZ was compromised. The conversation that followed was unlike anything my family had ever witnessed. These battle-hardened soldiers spoke to me with the deference reserved for commanders who had earned their trust through competence and character. They shared stories of operations I had planned, decisions I had made, and outcomes that had directly affected their lives and the lives of their fellow soldiers. General Morrison's strategic planning probably saved hundreds of lives during the Kazakhstan operation, explained Captain Sarah Chen, whose Special Forces background was evident in her bearing and speech. The intelligence network she established prevented what could have been a catastrophic ambush. My family listened in stunned silence as these warriors described missions they had never imagined, operations that had taken place in locations they couldn't pronounce, and outcomes that had implications far beyond their understanding. The daughter they had dismissed as a failure was being honored by some of the most elite soldiers in the American military. "We wanted to thank you personally, General," said Colonel Mitchell as the informal gathering began to wind down. "Your leadership has been an inspiration to all of us, and your reputation extends far beyond the operations we've personally witnessed." After the soldiers had departed, my family remained in the living room, still processing what they had experienced. The casual dismissal and gentle condescension that had characterized their attitude toward my career had been replaced by something approaching reverence. "Elizabeth," my father said quietly, his voice carrying a note of wonder, "those soldiers, they spoke about you like you were." "Like I was their commanding general," I finished for him. "Because I am. I've spent 20 years earning the respect of people who trust me with their lives and the security of our nation." Marcus, who had spent decades treating me like the family disappointment, looked at me with new eyes. "Liz, I had no idea. All those times I joked about you playing soldier, you were actually leading real soldiers in real operations with real consequences," I said, not unkindly but with absolute clarity. "The work I do isn't theoretical, Marcus. When I make decisions, people live or die based on whether I'm right or wrong." My mother, who had spent years suggesting that I abandon my military career for something more conventional, sat in stunned silence. The social gatherings and business achievements that had once seemed so important now appeared trivial compared to the responsibilities I carried. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you wouldn't have understood," I replied honestly. "For 20 years, you've measured success in terms of money and social status. You couldn't see that I was building something far more significant, a career devoted to protecting the freedom and security that allows people like Marcus to build shopping centers and families like ours to live in peace." The revelation changed everything between us, but not in the way I might have expected years earlier. Their newfound respect and understanding was gratifying, but it wasn't necessary for my sense of self-worth. I had long since stopped needing their approval to validate my choices. "We owe you an apology, Elizabeth," my father said, his voice heavy with regret. "We should have recognized what you were accomplishing instead of treating your service like a phase you would outgrow." "You don't owe me anything, Dad. You raised me with values that led me to serve something greater than myself. The fact that you didn't understand where that path would lead doesn't diminish what you gave me." As the evening concluded, I realized that the circle had been completed. The insecure teenager who had left home seeking purpose had returned as someone whose decisions affected global security. The family that had once seen me as a disappointment now understood that their nobody daughter had become someone whose name was known and respected in the corridors of power around the world. But perhaps the most important revelation was my own. I no longer needed their recognition to feel successful, their approval to feel worthy, or their understanding to feel fulfilled. I had found my purpose, excelled beyond anyone's expectations, and built a legacy that would endure long after shopping centers crumbled and stock portfolios became obsolete. The drive back to Washington that night took me past the same landmarks I had seen countless times before, but everything looked different now. I was no longer the overlooked daughter, trying to prove herself to a family that couldn't see her potential. I was Lieutenant General Elizabeth Morrison, trusted by presidents, respected by allies, and feared by enemies of freedom around the world. My phone buzzed with another encrypted message, a new situation developing in Eastern Europe that would require my expertise and leadership. As I accelerated toward my real life, I smiled to myself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to serve something greater than myself. The family that had once called me a nobody finally understood what I had always known, that true success isn't measured by the size of your bank account or the opinions of others, but by the impact you have on the world and the lives you touch through your service. And in that service I had found not just success but purpose, meaning, and a legacy that would outlast anything my family had ever built. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.